Is Putin preparing the Russian public for another brutal wave of mobilization? And what effect has Zelensky's visit to Bakhmut had on Ukrainian forces and the larger geopolitical situation? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's December 21st, 2022. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. So first off, when we look at the tactical map, we can see that Russian forces have continued to push somewhat at Bakhmut, but mostly have focused their efforts on the north. And again, I always caution that sometimes these maps report individual attacks, but they don't report scale. So one attack in Bakhmut sufficiently concentrated could, this could be a larger attack than what we saw 2 days ago when there were 4 separate attacks. But as we've also talked about, a lot of reports have indicated Russia does not seem to have any interest in changing their tactics. And 2, Ukraine's precision artillery and excellent drone reconnaissance work mean that Russia has a really hard time achieving the concentrations of forces necessary to engage in these sort of singular decisive battles. And when we zoom in, we can see exactly why. Even if you were to organize an assault of 1,000+ troops, you would have these natural obstacles where you would have a canalization. Think of the classic Battle of Thermopylae 300, Sparta movie situation where, yes, a large attacking force is canalized by 2 narrow obstacles in the form of these bridges, meaning that for Ukrainian forces, it would look more like a shooting gallery than a decisive push. This is one of the reasons why, of course, you can see terrain can become such a decisive factor in combat. Now, obviously, Russian forces could, in theory, flank around, and that's probably what we see. When we see separately reported attacks, that's probably what they're trying to do. And as we've seen, that results in a level of dispersion that means that Russian forces struggle again to seize any territory, especially when you look to the south here and you realize this is pretty empty. And I would not want to cross this open field while Ukrainian forces are dug in along this roadway. I'll get demonetized if I tell you what kind of mission it is, but it starts with S. And when we look at the map, we can see Russia has made no territorial gains in the last 24 hours, which of course actually sort of makes sense given that they generally seem to make their modest gains and then engage in consolidation. For Ukrainian forces, right, they want to keep the pressure on Russia to ensure that even consolidation is a painful casualty instilling process for them. Yes, they're being reported as having held these 2 city blocks here. I have no doubt that they'll continue to be contested. As we've talked about, Ukrainian forces really want to punish Russia, especially along this critical chunk of territory, to prevent them from establishing a foothold on the western side of this canal. But as we've also talked about, Ukrainian command, my assessment, almost every good, meaningful assessment has confirmed that Bakhmut itself, it's not clear to those of us who don't follow the channel why Russia is so fixated on Bakhmut. You and I know it's because Prigozhin has staked his entire reputation as an effective military commander on being able to deliver results with his Wagner Group, results that the Russian Ministry of Defense can't. So it means that Wagner Group is going to throw as many poor prisoners, let's be honest here, at Bakhmut as it takes. And I think the Russian Ministry of Defense and the DNR and LNR are looking at this and saying, well, if we have an infinite supply of cannon fodder, we should try to take advantage of it by doubling down and reinforcing these efforts in Bakhmut in order to achieve our own gains, right? It's to them, it's the place where they have the comparative advantage, at least in number of bodies they can throw at their problem. Of course, for Ukrainians, their goal is simply to minimize their own casualties and inflict the maximum number of Russian casualties. That's the whole point. And that's why I think you see counterattacks, but you also see very controlled, disciplined fighting by Ukrainian forces. And in some of the intercepts, of course, we've heard Russians complain that they never even see Ukrainian forces. This is exactly how you would want to fight this sort of fight. They call it trading space for time, and Ukrainians want to maintain as much space between them and Russian forces as possible, right? Minimizing those high casualty, close quarters, blow for blow battles, and maximize the number of demoralizing, punishing, and low cost types of engagements: drone attacks, artillery, booby traps, and surprise ambushes, counter assaults, anything other than a true stand-up fight. And so I think that's what Ukrainian forces are doing in Bakhmut and will continue to do for some time. And of course, Russia, as we talked about, also pushing, this is still assessing that Russians do not control Yakovlivka, which also seems highly plausible that Ukrainian forces will continue to try to push them back from taking Yakovlivka and Bilohorivka. But again, you're sort of stuck with questions when you're like, if they don't control Bilohorivka, how are they attacking near Vasile? But all this is incidental, right? Bakhmutsky, all this is incidental to taking Soledar, this key intersection that would give them some level of control over the area, over one of the main avenues of approach to Bakhmut. But even that, you can see based on the amount of open terrain, even if Russia was to take Bakhmutsky, Yakovlivka, Vasile, it would still have such a hard time crossing this giant open space to actually occupy the ground of Bakhmut, even though they would have much improved support by fire positions. Anyway, let's talk about the other news, right? Going over to ground news, which I always link in the description. It's a great way to prevent mis and disinformation, and you can check it out for free from my link. Is Zelenskyy going on a pretty significant tour, the first of which is he visited Bakhmut, which obviously is not just a morale boost for Ukrainian forces, right? It certainly is way easier to stand and fight for a government that you believe stands with you. Look, for example, if you want a case study in the opposite, look no further than the U.S.-backed Afghan government, where when the chips were down and the Taliban was at the door, their president, Ashraf Ghani, loaded, by some accounts, hundreds of millions of dollars in cash and gold bullion into helicopters and fled the country. Many other well-connected Afghans, a recent report indicated or revealed, that these guys actually fled the country with billions of dollars. That's right, billions. That's 1/4. Let's see if we can find this story. It's 1/4 of the Afghan. 1/4 of the total Afghan GDP was literally stolen from the country into Uzbekistan. And almost certainly with here we go, Business Insider's got it. The BuzzFeed, you can watch it work. Afghan government officials helped smugglers sneak out $1 billion in cash and gold out of Afghanistan as the U.S.-backed government collapsed. So this is what the Afghan leadership was doing when the chips were down and the fight was on. You can contrast this with Zelenskyy, who actually went to Bakhmut, one of the most dangerous places probably on the planet, honestly. And was willing to do so to give out awards and recognize the fight put up by many of the units there. And then he's going to turn around in another great political coup and visit Washington, D.C. This is significant, of course, because, well, it's important for him to make sure the American government understands how their money is being put to use and that Ukrainian forces continue to deliver real results against Russia. And frankly, the U.S. is getting the deal of the century on this, right? We have to spend a tiny fraction of our military budget, and it is destroying one of our chief geopolitical rivals, one of the adversaries of our biggest allies in Western Europe, and their military has been taken back 60 years, basically, in terms of effectiveness, and it's continuing to do so. So again, this is the deal of the century. We get to support an ally that we've long supported. We get to see one of our biggest enemies crushed, and not one American soldier has to fire a shot. It's a pretty good deal. And it's definitely worth it to continue to support Ukraine's efforts logistically, militarily, and with training and intelligence. Now, let's contrast this with the Ruskies. Well, in Moscow, the Russian Ministry of Defense has described it as necessary to increase the Russian army to 1.5 million troops. This is a huge number of troops. I don't know where they are going to get 1.5 million troops worth of equipment. Even if they were to loot all the Belarusian storage areas and take every piece of mothballed Soviet equipment and go put it on the front lines, it's not clear that that would be enough to equip 1.5 million troops. The only way they could do it is if they started to, put this nicely, start to recycle some of the equipment that's freed up from, other events in Bakhmut that troops may experience or not experience. But this is probably not expected. This is probably completely expected by every single Russian because, well, if we're honest, Russia, it's been a rumor for a long time that Russia's going to announce a general mobilization in January. This seems like it will free up even more authoritarian powers, granting them to Putin, given that it would be a general mobilization and national emergency. It's not really an emergency if you yourself created the situation, but that's fine. We all know friends who operate that way, right? When they put themselves in a terrible situation and then call you in a panic. Putin is that friend, except he's doing it to an entire country and they literally can't say no. It's funny because it's terrible. But this will also see a huge number of Russian draft-age men conscripted and forced into service, probably with minimal training and minimal equipment. Anyway, that is all I had for you for today. I hope you guys are all doing well. First off, of course, if you want access to the combat video breakdowns that are too intense for YouTube, you guys want to become members of the Patreon. Thanks so much to my Lieutenant tier patrons. You guys are the ones who make this whole thing possible. New video drops every single Friday, rain or shine. And of course, check out Ground News. That link is in the description as well. You can check them out for free through my link. And I will see all you guys in the next one.